Добрий день, вітаю.
Good afternoon. I want to thank everybody who joins us. My name is Ola Atamanova, and it's my pleasure to welcome everybody who joins Ukraine Media Center both online and offline. Today we will be discussing the events unfolding lately within the latest weeks, the change of the government, and how it will impact the situation in our defense sector. And joining us in the studio is Fedir Venislavskyi, member of the parliament, member of the Parliamentary Committee on National Security, Defense and Intelligence. Good afternoon, Mr. Fedir. Good afternoon. So this week was really quite intense, a lot of changes. So what are our expectations in terms of those changes? What changes in the defense sector will be crucial for us? What should we expect? Well, I think that it's obvious for everybody that the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine that was structured in the same way back in 2022 did a lot for Ukraine so it can carry on during this war, and all of the structure of the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine, all of the members of the Cabinet of Ministers fulfilled their functions within the security and defense sector, because no matter if we wanted or not, all of the state budget was aimed at the defense sector, and it's quite natural. 6 years, more than 5 years, there were no changes in the Cabinet of Ministers. We needed some new momentum. We can discuss whether the rotation inside of the cabinet didn't bring anything new, anything better. I'm sure it will yield something good, because I'm sure the new Prime Minister of Ukraine, who will be interested in demonstrating certain achievements related to her premiership. So I think the first steps, the meetings in the ministries, the identification of policies, they already witnessed that Yulia Sviridenko will try to intensify the work of the Cabinet of Ministers, and during her address in the Parliament, she mentioned that the priorities to us still are defense capabilities and the defense and security sector in general. The change of the Minister of Defense, Mr. Umerov, being replaced by Mr. Shmyhal, I think will bring a new momentum for the activity of the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine in terms of systemic nature of their activity, because Mr. Shmyhal is known for being very systemic, so to say, an adherent of the systemic actions in all of his offices, in all of his positions and capacities. And I think that the security and defense sector will become another platform for him, where he will be able to demonstrate the efficiency of his management and will intensify or reinforce the activity of this central executive body. For the time being, I evaluate the changes as positive, because they will definitely entail some intensification of work, new perspective, new ministers are taking some new offices, bringing the new expertise from their old positions, their old offices. And within a couple of months, we will be able to see the resolutions of the government, and our Prime Minister were the right thing to do. Okay, another question about the U.S. military aid. There's a lot of discussions around it. So to what extent the changes of the head of the defense agency will bring any intensification of supplies of military aid? Well, Mr. Shmyhal was taking part in the majority of the contacts related to provision of military aid to us, and he was personally taking care of a number of activities in the security and defense sector. He was visiting the front without announcing it, but I know it 100%. We were knowing it in our committee, and his outside contacts, I think he, as well as his foreign contacts, will be quite intense to make sure that this new momentum gained in the relations between the United States and Ukraine will only be intensified. We were discussing during our conversations in this studio some previous times were discussing whether Trump will change his position towards Ukraine. I was saying that, in my opinion, he would see that Putin is hard to deal with, and he may change his rhetorics. And I think that for the time being, the signals, the activities that we're observing on the end of our partners of the United States and Europe, and today we got some new signals that within 50 days the resolutions will be made on significant intensification of Ukraine's capabilities, provision of new types of capabilities to Ukraine. Those attacks that we observe on our cities and villages, they resulted in new resolutions to provide Ukraine with new air defense capabilities, including Patriot, with future compensation of this handover at the expense of our foreign partners. They provide such a good reason for cautious optimism. Hopefully, this work will be intensified. I think there are reasons to assume so, and Mr. Shmyhal, as the new head of the defense agency, will be involved more intensely in this process, because as the prime minister, he was taking care of a number of such areas of activity, and ex-minister of defense and currently the head of the NSDC, Mr. Umerov, will remain in one of the key positions in the security and defense sector. I think all of those things will only result in intensification of our defense capability. So again, there are reasons for cautious optimism, some reserved cautious optimism. So within this cooperation, we all expect to see new supplies of the weapons, additional supplies of air defense capabilities. So in our case, how long is this perspective? I think that all of the European countries, understanding the essence of the Putin's regime, are taking cautious resolutions to provide those capabilities that they have on their end. And I mean, no matter how you assess it, provision of air defense systems to Ukraine by the German party will only weaken their capabilities. But again, after the signals we got from our American partners, including the fact that they are ready to consider sale of air defense capabilities to Ukraine at the expense of European partners. And again, there is another condition that there is a permit needed from the United States in case of handover of any equipment that was manufactured in the United States. So such permit was already given. So probably we're not going to get 17 systems that were mentioned within the short-term period, but I think we're having good chances to receive them within some medium term at least. So the new government was already formed. Some final transformations are still underway. When it comes to ministries and ministers, I think the Minister of Culture was not yet appointed. In your opinion, how long are those processes going to take, and what are the first steps that you expect to see from this government as a people's deputy? I think that resolutions related to reformation of the ministries and after reformatting of the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine, we achieved optimization in the management sector, and the Prime Minister has already mentioned that her goal is to cut the government offices. So the unification of the government agencies should be considered in the framework of the overall optimization. So I think that those resolutions aimed at liquidation and reorganization of the ministries will be taken very quickly. Hopefully this week, the new legislative platform is already prepared for function of the new ministries, and I hope that shortly the proper candidate will be picked for the office of the Minister of Culture. And we were also considering the necessity of reformatting the information policy and countering Russian propaganda to have a dedicated agency established for that. And I think that there will be a candidate picked again for the position of the cabinet of the Minister of Culture. But again, during the war, there are not so much people willing to take care of the culture because all of the budget is being allocated for defense, and the minister who will not have sufficient financial resources to demonstrate some achievements, that's not a very good perspective for any person who will head such a ministry. So hopefully it will all take place in the short-term perspective. But talking about the first steps, I would like to see Cabinet of Ministers, despite the war, propose the Parliament of Ukraine in compliance with the law on Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine and the Constitution, the program of their activities, so we could see what are they trying to achieve as the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine, what are their goals, the goals of the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine, specific ministries. So I think that, well, I'm not going to disclose the details, but there is some preparation work underway at the level of the parliamentary committees and at the level of the ministries to shape that goal, strategic goal. I think it will be presented. We all expect to see it shortly.
Yes, this has to be introduced after the legislation adaptation. I would like to touch upon this a little bit, if you may. So the contract, is this a contract 60 plus? What are we talking about here? Yeah, I recommend to your colleagues that the process of mobilization, the questions about it should be addressed to those people who are actually in charge of it. So this would be better to ask them what about the legislation or improvement of the legislation. As you asked, if it's possible to engage under a contract the civilians who reached the certain age after which they cannot be military personnel anymore. So these things have to be followed up with the solid contracts that would foresee guarantees for the people who are risking their lives by signing these contracts. So those events, like for example, those events that were written about as such that were undertook for the first time in the history of Ukraine, including the people aged more than 60-year-old who used the weaponry from the times of the Soviet Union. Basically, we don't have modern specialists on these types of weaponry. That's why we have to engage people who are familiar with these systems. Because we had this paradoxical situation. This is an example from me personally. Two officers, one 60-year-old, another in reserve, another one is acting officer, and he received everything according to the new laws, higher salary. But the one who retired receives, of course, less money than he is. So that's why I think it is important to separate people that are of age, and they have to. The approach to their engagement should be different. I think this question is important for discussion because there is rumors that people over 60-year-old are going to be forcefully engaged. No, this is nonsense because as of right now, it is only under the contract and only after his voluntary agreement. Only in these cases, it is in principle. Impossible because it contradicts the law of mobilization, the draft law. So what are the legal obstacles that we're facing when we're talking about the 60-year-old people being called upon arms? This was one of the most difficult questions, actually, that we discussed during the development of the new program. And this decision will be made on the highest level, including the Commander-in-Chief and the Supreme Commander-in-Chief. So, because we cannot allow the violations in this sphere. Oh, there is another news about the mobilization officers. Can you comment on that? Well, from the point of view of legislation or other legal factors, and taking into account the strikes that the Russian Federation is undertaking these days against Ukraine, which are aiming, the goal of which is obviously to instill fear in the among Ukrainians. We can really say that it could be really the actual target for the Russian Federation, and it's not, and as of now, I would like to know that the mobilization offices have enhanced their work in the recent years, implementing different digitalization reforms. So I don't think this question depends on the program. You mentioned the digitalization. How successful this program is? I would refer to the actually to the Supreme Commander. He said that we are going to conduct mobilization until we more or less satisfy the demand that is posed before us by the general staff. It's about 50,000-60,000 people per
30.
1,000 people and per month, and it's going to be some changes because these things they are dynamic and they are being corrected accordingly, depending on what is the demand and what are the plans and what we are seeing, and to the bottom line here actually is that we don't think that we are doing really well with our mobilization. However, we need to base our evaluations on the reality. We haven't been drafted civilians for a long time, more than 100 years. Any questions from the floor, please?
CNA news agency. I'm just wondering, like, what do you think about this drone deal between the U.S., this mega drone deal? Do we have more details, and what do we think about it? That's the first question.
Well, Ukraine, within these years of war, has demonstrated a lot of positive achievements that are unique. I mean, even compared to the global defense sector, Ukraine was the first one to use FPV drones. Now Ukraine has quite an extensive line of aerial, ground, and water surface unmanned systems that are interesting for a lot of countries in the world, including USA. We understand that this sector development is only going to intensify. They already sparked some interest, and we are going just to wait for formalization of all of the agreements. I think we'll see some very good track that will result in intensification of cooperation between Ukraine and the United States, Ukraine and other foreign partners, because those specimens of weapons Ukraine is developing now are very interesting for a lot of countries all around the world when it comes to intensification of their defense capabilities. Thank you.
Do we have more details on the deal, when it will happen?
Well, unfortunately, I cannot share any details with you because I'm not involved in development of this agreement. It's happening at the level of the defense ministry, so you better address your questions with them. Thank you.
So the Ukraine was proposing to have a meeting with the Russia this week, and Russia said that they will remain their original stance. So what do you think about this meeting if the dynamic has not changed? What are we expecting, and how do we think of it?
Well, I think that the process of the meetings that were initiated between Ukraine and Russian Federation, even despite the war, it has already yielded some positive results when it comes to return of our prisoners of war, exchanges of prisoners of war, exchanges of the bodies of those killed in action, and it already allows stating that such meetings are worth continuing to solve these kind of issues on the operational level. When it comes to the representatives of Russian side, we hear them saying that they have a clear vision and clear intention to achieve the goals that they set for themselves: destruction of Ukraine as a country, eradication of Ukrainian people. So I think what they declare and what's happening in reality are two very different things. Within 3.5 years of the big war, Russia failed to demonstrate not even strategic but even operational success, unlike Ukraine. And I think that consolidation of efforts of our foreign partners, change of the stance of the United States of America, who are already making quite drastic statements when it comes to Russia. They say that it's Russia who doesn't want to end the war. Russia has no intention to stop the bloodshed, and Ukraine, the representatives of Ukraine were always making statements about transition to diplomatic process, but Russia is still not ready for that. So I think that intensification of the sanction pressure, intensification of supplies of defense capabilities and even offensive capabilities to Ukraine will change the situation in the battlefield and change the rhetorics of the representatives of Russian Federation. I think that the situation within the last week, the last 10 days, when we were observing the collapse of air flight communication in Russia, that's one of the good signals what Russia may expect if we get some long-range capabilities. So I hope that our partners will provide the capabilities to us that will be painful for Russian Federation, and that's the only way Russia may change its stance on the end of the war, because war is not only what's going on in the territory of Ukraine, but also what's going on in the territory of Russia. And the more the citizens of Russia feel that there is war going on in their territory, the more they will press on their government, and the government will understand that at some moment some irreversible processes may start in Ukraine that will result in change of regime.
I wanted to ask, Zelensky advisor said Chinese Prime Minister Xi Jinping the leader of China should meet with President Zelensky. I wanted to ask, with the background of knowing that a lot of Russian drones are made up of Chinese components, there were recently, Ukrainian intelligence captured 2 Chinese citizens of stealing intelligence of a Ukraine missile. We also captured 2 Chinese nationals on the front line in Ukraine. With this context, how do we see about negotiating with China as a peacemaker? What do you think of this?
Well, in my opinion, China always had and will have their strategic interests, and they see Russia as one of the pieces of the puzzle that allows them to achieve their own interests. So I'm not thinking China is really an ally of Russian Federation. They play their own they try to achieve their own goals and they exercise their own mission in the globalized world. So I think as soon as Beijing feels that sanction pressure, and today we're already having signals from China that they're not satisfied by the use of sanctions by European Union that were imposed on those Russian companies that work with China. So as soon as it becomes painful for China, even indirectly through their cooperation with Russian Federation, so any economic shortfalls, any economic losses of China, they will irreversibly change their view of this war. And I agree, if China says their word about the end of the war, I think that it would significantly influence the position of Russia. I mean, they would review their stance and they would understand the war should be ending soon. Thank you very much for your questions. And Mr. Fedir, we would like to thank you for this conversation. Let me remind you, joining us was Fedir Venislavskyi, the People's Deputy of Ukraine. Thank you and stay tuned. Glory to Ukraine.